Good afternoon, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's Friday, June the 25th, 2021. This is another edition of the Daily Factor. My name is Faraz Patel. We are glad you are joining us. And of course, I'll be in your company for the next 1 hour or so. But before, of course, we start with our local updates, we go to our COVID-19 statistics. And last night, it was yet another record for South Africa. 16,078 new COVID-19 cases were recorded. Unfortunately, a further 148 COVID-19 related deaths were reported, taking the total deaths to 59,406. The South African Communist Party celebrates its centenary this year next month, as the party plans to be a key figure in the tripartite alliance along with COSATU and the African National Congress. Now, the SACP was formed 4 years after the Russian Revolution, which saw the overthrow of the Tsar royal family. Coming in the next few seconds, we will be discussing the role of the SACP in your local updates. Well, joining me now to discuss the role of the party and its future in terms of the political and the working sphere of the country, I have the pleasure of welcoming the party's Central Committee member, Alex MASHILO. Mr. MASHILO, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us on the Daily Factor.
Good afternoon to you and to the viewers of the Daily Factor.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Mr. MASHILO, just to kick things off, just give us a brief role right now as we speak of the party, especially now being part of the tripartite alliance.
Firstly, the alliance was established by the South African Communist Party. That was back in 1929, following a resolution adopted by the Executive Committee of the Communist International in Moscow in 1928. That resolution saw it as the task of the South African Communist Party to consolidate unity with all the people who were fighting against colonization. The resolution identified the African National Congress amongst the oppressed people as a key organization that the South African Communist Party could work with. However, the SACP had to transform the African National Congress into a fighting revolutionary national organization for that alliance to work. The resolution further called on the South African Communist Party to forge that alliance with the progressive trade union movement and peasants organizations in South Africa. So now peasants are people who do have land. They are not employed by someone else. They rely on working the land in order to live. They could have farm animals that they look after and other activities. They are neither employers nor employees employed by someone else. As we know, the process of capitalist development in South Africa has destroyed the peasant mode of production largely and replaced it with the capitalist mode of production. For that to happen, colonization had to dispossess or expropriate the oppressed, firstly of land, of their farm animals, of other things they had, and then de-skill them, leaving them with nothing of their own except their potential to be trained through skills development in order to serve as the employees of the capitalist class. So over the years, the alliance therefore evolved to be the alliance between the ANC, the South African Congress of Trade Unions, which was replaced by the Congress of South African Trade Unions, COSATU, in moving forward. It also evolved by way of reconfiguring. We saw in the 1950s, after the apartheid regime, as the first act it adopted after rising to power, banning the Communist Party. After that ban of the Communist Party, we saw the establishment of the Congress of Democrats and the Colored People's Congress, and the alliance became a Congress alliance with the African National Congress, the South African Congress of Trade Unions, the Colored People's Congress, the South African Indian Congress, and the Congress of Democrats, with the Communist Party as an underground formation, but its leaders and members active in all those formations. It was that alliance that coordinated the Congress of the People in 1955, where the Freedom Charter was adopted. When, after Sharpeville in the 1960s, the apartheid regime escalated its violence against the people, the Communist Party was the first to adopt the armed struggle. And efforts had to be undertaken for the ANC to accept that the armed struggle now was needed as one of the pillars of the struggle. And Comrade Nelson Mandela and others were given the task to persuade the leadership of the ANC. It was after the success of that persuasion that Umkhonto we Sizwe was established in December 1961. And the establishment of Umkhonto we Sizwe was supported by the armed struggle networks that had already been established by the SACP and that had already carried out some actions against the apartheid state. In the 1980s, after the formation of COSATU, we saw the alliance establish the mass democratic movement and driving a frontal attack against the apartheid regime until FW de Klerk, in fact, was forced to unban political parties, including the Communist Party. Negotiations started leading to our transition from apartheid in 1995. So the history of South Africa can never be written without recognizing the crucial role played by the Communist Party in bringing about our democratic dispensation today.
Mr. Mashilo, the road to socialism and, of course, the final fulfillment of it right here in South Africa, what would you say is the party's plan in trying to tackle capitalism, and especially now with the high unemployment rate our country faces?
It is very clear that what we achieved in 1994 was a radical democratic breakthrough towards freedom. It was not the achievement of freedom, because under conditions of freedom, there is no person who is being exploited by another person for profit. So exploitation is systematically eliminated so that freedom can take place. So what we achieved in 1994 were important freedoms that we were denied. We were deprived of before 1994. However, even when you assess some of those freedoms today, some of them are only there in the Constitution and in legislation, but are not exercisable in reality. For example, look at the whole question of justice in South Africa. Unless you have money to pay very expensive attorneys and senior advocates as a team, there is no way you can exercise the right that we see other people exercise by going to the high courts, the Supreme Courts of Appeals, and the Constitutional Court in a particular way that the exercise of that right for the overwhelming majority of the unemployed and the workers is prevented by not having the money to pay for the lawyers. So there are some mechanisms that have been put in place, but those mechanisms are not as fast as the mechanisms for those who have the money to do so. Now, we are still a long way towards freedom. The struggle is not over. What we need to do today is to combine our struggle to achieve our immediate interests, to achieve our momentary interests as the workers. Those interests include employment creation, poverty reduction, and inequality reduction. So if we make progress in that particular regard, we will also be paving the way towards socialism. And the best way we can do so is to strengthen our organizations to achieve the goals of the Freedom Charter, because once we have achieved all the goals of the Freedom Charter, we would have laid a firm basis for an advance towards socialism, or we would have reinformed that basis because we have laid it in 1994.
Mr. Mashilo, it's clear that the SACP, of course, were quite hard on its stance on state capture, but corruption still reigns supreme right here in South Africa, and especially amongst the ruling party. What is the SACP's take now on taking the next level to continue to tackle corruption, which still plagues the country?
Let us go back a little bit in 2014 November, when the Augmented Central Committee of the South African Communist Party came out with a statement for the first time of all organizations existing in South Africa, talking about something called corporate state capture. It was the SACP that exposed the existence of corporate state capture, parasitic and criminal networks that had achieved the capture of certain authorities in the state. Those networks are anchored in the private sector because the money stolen in the public sector are destined for private interest, and some of them are used in what we call primitive accumulation, which refers to a precursor to capitalist investment and participation in the exploitation of the masses, which the ANC in 1969 warned against. So it was also the SACP of all organizations in South Africa that demanded the establishment of a judicial commission of inquiry into state capture. At that time, the leaderships of all organizations rejected the call by the SACP until almost a year later, when the public protector, the former public protector, issued a report prescribing the call by the SACP as a remedial action, except for that she proposed that the Chief Justice of the Constitutional Court be the one to identify the judge to be appointed by the president. That's the vanguard role played by the SACP, and the former public protector reached that conclusion independently, but that conclusion was first put forward by the SACP as the way forward. Since the commission was established, we have seen South Africa making progress in dealing with corruption. However, we are still a long way towards achieving victory against corruption. We have made commendable progress, but corruption under capitalism is systemic, because capitalism is about private interests. Wherever corruption is committed, the money stolen is destined to feed the root of private interest. So for so long as we do not appreciate that corruption under capitalism is systemic, it is a private enterprise. We will not uproot it in its entirety, but we have to make more progress than ever before through socialist-oriented measures in fighting corruption.
Mr. Mashilo, back in the 1990s, and maybe you'll be able to correct me, I remember there was a manifesto that the SACP, of course, had put into place, which was power to the workers in a democratic state. How close are we to seeing workers have that power, which will, of course, eliminate any sort of, oppression within the workplace?
What we must eliminate is exploitation in the workplace, and is the political dominance of the exploiters in society as a result of the proceeds of exploitation in the workplace. We have experienced serious challenges, including disintegration or fragmentation of a number of trade unions. That we must accept is a serious challenge. We have to rebuild the unity of organized workers, and we must organize the unorganized workers. Workers, unlike capital, depend on their unity of purpose against capitalist exploitation, unity of purpose for their interests in order to triumph. We are still a long way to go, but at least we are advancing. We have got to deepen this advancement because power will not come to the workers except through workers' power.
Mr. Mashilo, the universal basic minimum wage, I think both you and I can agree at this very moment, it is going at a snail's pace. What more needs to be done in order for this to be achieved and to push those who are the capitalists to succumb to it?
The South African state has been following a policy of reducing corporate tax, while at the same time the macroeconomic framework under whose auspices we have experienced persistently high rates of unemployment, high rates of poverty, and high rates of inequality is not changing things for the better. We are not industrializing. In other words, South Africa is not building industry. The contribution of manufacturing to the country's economy and to employment is falling. Unless we achieve a change, it is going to be very difficult to even finance social policy, because the resources to finance social policy are produced in the economy, in the productive sector of the economy. With that said,
okay, Mr. Mashilo, we need you to put your audio on. I think we just lost your audio there. Mr. Mashilo?
The macroeconomic framework to deliver on that score, we are not going to succeed.
Okay, Mr. Mashilo, I have one final question for you. I have to put this in before we close. I know that the South African Communist Party has continued to champion the liberation of the people of Palestine. What needs to be done now from not just a tripartite alliance, but from a South African point of view to push for that liberation of Palestine to happen?
We must fully implement the resolutions to downgrade the South African embassy in Tel Aviv to allies in office. We must push for the boycott, divestment, and sanctions against any Israeli product produced in the occupied territory. We must push and fire on all cylinders, diplomatic and democratic combined, until the people of Palestine achieve a transition. They are supported by an imperialist state. Israel is supported by an imperialist state called the United States. And we saw yesterday, on the 23rd of June, Israel stand with that imperialist state called the United States in pushing for the continuation of the blockade against Cuba. Those people work together and they are not prepared to accept any justice. It is important that the world progressives and revolutionaries rally together behind the people of Palestine and offer our support and solidarity until they achieve their right to statehood, their right to democratic national sovereignty and self-determination.
Alex Mashilo, the Central Committee member of the South African Communist Party, we say thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Well, the South African Communist Party, of course, will be holding various number of events starting next month to, of course, commemorate 100 years of its existence and, of course, the role that it did play in taking down the apartheid government. Well, after the break, of course, we will be going to our international news. Do stay tuned.